Dust swirled in the afternoon light as Sarah Bennett knelt beside the fallen soldier. Blood soaked through her uniform, none of it her own. The distant thunder of artillery punctuated the eerie silence of the abandoned village. 3 miles to the extraction point. No radio, no backup. Just her and Sergeant Mills, unconscious and bleeding out. The same men who had dismissed her as too weak for frontline medical duty were gone now. Some captured, others scattered in the ambush. Sarah stared at the sergeant's massive frame. 400 pounds of deadweight. Impossible odds. She closed her eyes, remembering her father's words. The human spirit has no limits. When she opened them again, determination had replaced fear. Could a woman once deemed too fragile by military standards summon the superhuman strength needed to carry a man twice her size through enemy territory? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Bennett had never intended to become a battlefield nurse. Growing up in Oak Ridge, a quiet Midwestern town where cornfields stretched to the horizon, her dreams had been simple. But life, as her father often said, had other plans. At 28, Sarah stood barely 5'3", with a slender frame that belied her inner strength. Her hands, though small, moved with precision born from years of practice. Those hands now trembled slightly as she clutched the locket around her neck. Inside, a faded photograph of her family, taken before her mother's illness, changed everything. "You've got more grit than most men I've served with," her father would tell her. Thomas Bennett had been a military medic in his younger days, his broad shoulders now slightly stooped with age. After her mother's death, he'd raised Sarah alone, teaching her that courage wasn't measured by physical size but by the capacity of one's heart. "The body is just a vessel," he'd say during their evening walks. "It's what you put inside that counts." Sarah had carried those words through nursing school, where she graduated top of her class. She carried them through advanced trauma training, where instructors raised eyebrows at her small stature. And she carried them to the recruitment office, where she volunteered for frontline medical service. "Battlefield medicine isn't for everyone, Bennett," Captain Reynolds had said during her initial assessment, his eyes lingering on her slight frame, "especially those who might struggle with the physical demands." Sarah had met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I've never let my size determine my capabilities." Reynolds had smiled thinly. Noble sentiment. Reality's different. That conversation replayed in Sarah's mind throughout her deployment training. While other recruits were embraced by the brotherhood of service, Sarah found herself isolated, the outsider who needed to prove herself daily. The day she first encountered Sergeant James Mills remained vivid in her memory. 6'5" and built like a linebacker, Mills commanded attention when he entered a room. His booming voice carried across the training field as he supervised combat readiness drills. "You sure you're in the right place, little lady?" he'd asked when she reported for field medical certification. Sarah had straightened her spine. "Absolutely, Sergeant." His laugh had echoed. "We'll see about that." The next 8 hours had been brutal, carrying weighted packs through obstacle courses, establishing field medical stations under simulated fire, evacuating wounded soldiers twice her size. By sunset, Sarah's muscles screamed in protest, but she remained standing while 2 male colleagues had dropped out. Mills had approached her at day's end, his expression unreadable. "You're still here." "Yes, Sergeant." "Doesn't mean you belong." He'd walked away, leaving Sarah to wonder if anything would ever be enough. Only Lieutenant Rodriguez, the unit's communications officer, had shown faith in her abilities. A thoughtful man with kind eyes, Rodriguez had witnessed Sarah's emergency treatment of a recruit who'd collapsed during training. "That was impressive work, Bennett," he'd said afterward. "Your technical skills are exceptional." "Thank you, sir." "Don't mind Mills and Reynolds. They've lost too many people. Makes them protective in backwards ways." Sarah had nodded, though the explanation offered little comfort. 3 months later, she found herself deployed to a conflict zone where theoretical training collided with harsh reality. The medical unit operated from a converted school building, treating both military personnel and civilian casualties. Blood and antiseptic became her daily perfume, the rhythm of triage her constant companion. At night, when the wounded slept and the generators hummed, Sarah would take out her locket, tracing the faces of her parents with a fingertip. Sometimes she'd write letters to her father, never mentioning the skepticism that followed her like a shadow. "I'm making a difference here," she wrote instead. "That's all that matters." But on her bunk, away from watchful eyes, Sarah sometimes wondered if she'd made a mistake. Not about her abilities, those she trusted completely, but about a world that seemed determined to judge her by appearance rather than action. She closed the locket with a soft click. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove herself. Sarah tucked the necklace beneath her uniform, its weight familiar against her skin. A small reminder of why she fought so hard to be where others said she shouldn't be. Sarah's field medical manual had become an extension of herself. Dog-eared pages filled with her neat handwriting in the margins. Notes on improvised treatments, medication substitutions, and regional plants with medicinal properties. Information not taught in training but learned through necessity and observation. "Your manual looks like it's been through a war," remarked Nurse Chan, one of the few women in the unit. Petite but fiery, Chan had become Sarah's closest ally. Sarah smiled, closing the book. "Just making it useful. Captain wants all medical staff for briefing in 10, Chan said, lowering her voice. "Word is we're moving to the contested zone." The briefing room buzzed with tension as Captain Reynolds outlined their next mission. A village 12 miles north needed evacuation. Civilians caught between advancing enemy forces and strategic military positions. "Medical team will follow the escort unit," Reynolds explained, pointing to the map. "Set up triage here, evacuate priority cases first." His gaze swept the room, hesitating when it reached Sarah. Lieutenant Rodriguez specifically requested Bennett for this operation. Sarah felt the room's attention shift toward her. Rodriguez nodded in her direction. "Bennett's demonstrated exceptional field trauma skills," Rodriguez said simply. "We'll need them." Captain Reynolds's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Prep your kits. We move at 0500. As the briefing dispersed, Sergeant Mills approached Sarah, his massive frame blocking the doorway. "Rodriguez may think you're ready for this," he said, voice low. "I'm not convinced." Sarah met his gaze. "I understand your concerns, Sergeant." "Do you? This isn't a training exercise. When shells start falling, theory meets reality fast." "I'm familiar with reality, Sergeant Mills." His eyes narrowed. "We'll see." He stepped aside, allowing her to pass. That evening, Sarah prepared her medical pack with methodical precision. Extra tourniquets, field bandages, morphine, antibiotics, the essentials of keeping people alive when minutes mattered and proper facilities were miles away. A knock interrupted her inventory. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood at the door of her quarters, holding a satellite phone. "Thought you might want to call home before tomorrow," he said, offering the device. 5 minutes won't break regulations." Sarah accepted gratefully. "Thank you, sir." Her father answered on the third ring, his voice a balm to her nerves. "Just checking in," she said, careful to reveal nothing about the coming mission. "You sound tired, kiddo," he replied, concern evident even across thousands of miles. "Long days. Remember what I taught you about endurance?" Sarah smiled despite herself. "Pace over power. Technique over brute force. That's my girl." A pause. "You're doing important work, Sarah. Never doubt that." After disconnecting, Sarah returned the phone to Rodriguez, who studied her with thoughtful eyes. "Mills giving you trouble?" Sarah hesitated. "Nothing I can't handle." "He's a good soldier," Rodriguez said. "Best I've served with in many ways. But he has blind spots. Tradition. How things should be. And I don't fit his mold." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "No. But maybe that's what we need right now. Someone who thinks differently." That night, Sarah struggled to sleep. Intelligence reports suggested the enemy was closing in faster than expected. The village evacuation had become urgent, nearly desperate. Tomorrow would test everything she knew, everything she was. In the pre-dawn darkness, the convoy assembled 3 armored vehicles, 2 medical transport trucks, and 60 personnel divided between security and medical roles. Sarah checked her gear one final time, securing her locket beneath her uniform. Sergeant Mills conducted final checks on the security team, his voice carrying in the cool morning air. When he reached Sarah, he paused. "Stay close to the main group," he ordered. "First sign of trouble, you get to cover. Clear?" "Yes, Sergeant." He studied her face for a moment, as if searching for something. Then he moved on without another word. As the sun crested the horizon, the convoy rolled forward. Sarah watched the base recede in the distance, the familiar giving way to unknown terrain and uncertain outcomes. Beside her, the medic's manual rested in her pocket, its pages containing knowledge but no guarantees. Whatever waited ahead, Sarah knew one truth with absolute certainty. She would be judged not by the strength of her back but by the steadiness of her hands and the courage in her heart. The convoy moved through terrain that shifted from dusty plains to rocky foothills. Sarah's fingers traced the torn edges of their operational map, now stained with sweat and grime. Something felt wrong. The villages they passed stood eerily empty, laundry still hanging on lines, doors left ajar, signs of hasty departure. "Supposed to be friendlies in this sector," Corporal Jennings muttered beside her. Sarah nodded, uneasy. "Where did they go?" Lieutenant Rodriguez passed through the transport, checking communications. "We've lost contact with our forward scouts," he said quietly to the driver. "Maintain current speed, but stay alert." Sarah caught his eye. "Sir, these villages." "I see it," he answered, voice low. "Intelligence may be outdated." By midday, they reached the outskirts of their destination. Smoke rose from several buildings, and distant popping sounds suggested sporadic gunfire. Captain Reynolds ordered the convoy to halt in a defensible position while Mills led a reconnaissance team forward. "Medical team, prepare for casualties," Reynolds instructed. "Bennett, you're with the second group. Chun, Davidson, with me." Sarah began organizing the triage area, unfolding cots and arranging supplies with practiced efficiency. 20 minutes later, Mills returned, his expression grim. "Village is partially occupied by civilians," he reported. "Enemy forces appear to be massing northeast, approximately 2 kilometers. We have maybe an hour before they advance." Reynolds nodded. "Rodriguez, get the evacuation started. Mills, secure the perimeter. We move fast, we move quiet." The operation began with measured urgency. Sarah accompanied the second team into the village, medical pack secured to her back. The scene inside was chaos. Frightened civilians gathering meager possessions, children crying, elderly moving too slowly. Sarah immediately began assessing medical needs, identifying those requiring immediate evacuation. An elderly man clutched her arm, speaking rapidly in the local dialect. The translator explained, "He says there are more people hiding in the cellars of the northern buildings. They're afraid to come out." Sarah relayed this to Rodriguez, who dispatched Mills and a team to investigate. 30 minutes into the evacuation, they had loaded nearly 40 civilians into the transports. Sarah treated minor injuries, mostly cuts and dehydration, saving space in the vehicles for critical cases. Then came the sound that changed everything. Not the expected crack of rifle fire, but the distinctive whoosh of mortar rounds. "Incoming!" Mills bellowed from his position. The first impact hit 20 meters from the main convoy, showering vehicles with debris. The second struck closer, flipping one of the lighter transports. Civilians scattered, screaming. The disciplined response of the military unit dissolved into frantic defensive positions. "Bennett, get to cover!" Rodriguez shouted, pulling injured civilians toward a stone building. Sarah spotted a young boy, no more than 6, frozen in terror in the village square. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward him, scooping him into her arms as another mortar round hit, this one striking the building beside them. The concussive force threw them both forward, Sarah twisting to absorb the impact with her own body. Ears ringing, dust filling her lungs, Sarah checked the boy quickly. Scared but uninjured, and rushed him to Rodriguez's position. All around, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Coordinated fire came from multiple directions, suggesting they'd run into something far worse than a random patrol. "It's an ambush," Rodriguez said, voice tight with tension. "They knew we were coming." Captain Reynolds's voice crackled over the radio. "All units fall back to secondary position. Convoy is compromised." Sarah helped load the remaining civilians into the one functioning transport. As she turned to retrieve more medical supplies, she saw Mills charging toward a group of exposed children, drawing fire away from them. The massive sergeant moved with surprising speed, getting the children to safety before taking up a defensive position. Then Sarah saw what Mills didn't, a flanking enemy fighter with a clear line of sight. Without thinking, she screamed a warning, but her voice was lost in the chaos of battle. The enemy fighter fired, and Mills jerked backward, taking multiple hits to his side and leg before returning fire and eliminating the threat. Sarah ran toward him as he collapsed, her medical training overriding all sense of self-preservation. Blood soaked his uniform as she reached him, his massive frame suddenly vulnerable on the dusty ground. "I've got you, Sergeant," she said, applying pressure to the wounds. "Stay with me." Mills's blood pulsed between Sarah's fingers as she assessed his wounds. 3 entry points: upper thigh, lower abdomen, left shoulder. The abdominal wound concerned her most: potential internal bleeding, risk of sepsis. She needed to operate now in the middle of an active firefight. "Stay with me, Sergeant," she ordered, injecting a field dose of morphine. Mills's eyes fluttered. "Bennett? Get out of here." "Not happening." Sarah ripped open her pack, working with swift precision. All around them, the battle intensified. Another mortar round hit nearby, showering them with debris. Sarah hunched over Mills, shielding his wounds from contamination. She glimpsed Rodriguez directing the last transport away, civilians packed inside. He caught her eye across the chaos and spoke urgently into his radio. Sarah couldn't hear him but understood. They were being left behind. Finding momentary shelter behind a partially collapsed wall, Sarah cut away Mills's uniform. The wounds were worse than she'd initially assessed. The bullets had fragmented on impact. Extracting them all would be impossible under these conditions. She needed to stabilize him enough to move. Her hands moved automatically: pressure bandages, clotting agents, improvised drainage. Mills drifted between consciousness and delirium, his massive frame dwarfing her as she worked. In training, she'd been taught to maintain communication with the patient. Now, she found herself speaking continuously. "You know, Sergeant, this would be easier if you weighed less than a tank," she said, inserting in 4-line. "But I've got you. Not leaving you behind." A crackle from Mills's radio startled her. Through the static, she heard Rodriguez's voice. "Perimeter breached. Fall back to extraction point, 3 miles southeast." The transmission cut out. Sarah grabbed the radio. "Lieutenant, this is Bennett. I'm with Sergeant Mills. He's wounded. Can't walk." Static hissed. Then, "Bennett, enemy forces. Between your position, extraction. Wait for." The signal died. Sarah checked the radio's casing. A bullet had grazed it, damaging the transmitter. She had heard enough. The extraction point was 3 miles southeast. Enemy forces between them. No immediate rescue. Finishing Mills's field surgery, Sarah secured the bandages and checked his vitals. Stable but precarious. Without proper medical attention, infection would set in within hours. She had antibiotics for maybe 2 days. A sudden burst of gunfire sent her flat against the ground. Peering cautiously around their shelter, she saw enemy combatants moving methodically through the village. 2 American soldiers were being led away at gunpoint, captured. Others lay motionless in the dust. Sarah ducked back, mind racing. Stay hidden and hope for rescue? Impossible with Mills's condition. Surrender? Likely death or worse for both of them given the intelligence Mills carried. That left one option. Somehow reach the extraction point. She checked Mills again. The massive sergeant weighed at least 250 pounds normally, now deadweight and unable to walk. Even dragging him would be nearly impossible for her 120-pound frame. And they had 3 miles of hostile territory to cross. Impossible, she whispered. Mills's eyes opened, surprising her. What's situation? He asked, voice barely audible. Sarah gave him the unvarnished truth. His face, pale from blood loss, hardened with resolve. Leave me, he said. Give me a sidearm. I'll buy you time. That's not happening, Sergeant. That's an order, Bennett. Sarah met his gaze steadily. With respect, sir, you're in no position to give orders. You're now my patient. Mills tried to push himself up, grimacing as the movement tore at his wounds. Sarah pressed him gently but firmly back down. You can't carry me, he said, each word an effort. Nobody could. Sarah looked away, scanning their surroundings. The firing had moved to the other side of the village. Soon the enemy would begin searching buildings systematically. They had minutes, not hours. She remembered her father's lessons from childhood. How he'd taught her to move objects 3 times her weight using proper leverage and momentum. The body is a system of levers, he'd explained. Physics doesn't care how strong you look. Sarah's gaze fell on the medical supplies scattered around them. Bandages, splints, tubing. Her mind began calculating possibilities. Nobody has to carry you, she said finally. Not conventionally. Working quickly, she began fashioning a harness from medical supplies. Pressure bandages became load-bearing straps. Splints reinforced critical junction points. For tubing secured cross-bracing. Mills watched through half-lidded eyes. What are you doing? Making a yoke, Sarah replied, testing the strength of her creation. If I can't lift you with my arms, I'll use my strongest muscles. Legs, core, back. Bennett, Mills whispered. It's not possible. Sarah secured the final knots on her improvised harness. Let's find out. The makeshift harness felt awkward against Sarah's shoulders. She'd positioned Mills on his side, minimizing pressure on his wounds while distributing his weight across her back and hips. The contraption looked absurd, an intricate web of medical supplies transformed into a load-bearing system. This won't work, Mills murmured, consciousness fading in and out. Sarah didn't waste breath responding. She took one deliberate step forward, then another. Fire shot through her lower back. Her knees threatened to buckle. Sweat immediately beaded her forehead despite the cool air. Physics, she gasped to herself. Not strength. She adjusted her stance, shifting her center of gravity forward. The third step came easier. The fourth easier still as she found the rhythm that worked with Mills's deadweight rather than against it. Distant shouts spurred her forward. Enemy forces were conducting a systematic sweep of buildings. She needed to clear the village before they reached this sector. Each step became a negotiation between determination and physical reality. After 50 excruciating yards, Sarah paused in the shadow of a bombed-out structure. Her lungs burned. Muscles she'd never been conscious of before screamed in protest. This was insanity. No human could carry twice their body weight for 3 miles. Put me down, Mills whispered. Save yourself. With respect, Sergeant, Sarah managed between ragged breaths. Shut up. She started moving again, focusing on the mechanics. Small steps. Push from the legs. Keep the back straight. Use momentum. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. The impossible is just the untried. The village edge came into view. Beyond lay open terrain, dangerous for its lack of cover but essential to cross. Sarah edged along walls and destroyed vehicles, avoiding open spaces. Twice she froze as enemy patrols passed nearby. Mills remained mercifully silent, either from discipline or semi-consciousness. As the sun began to set, Sarah finally cleared the last building. Ahead stretched rocky scrubland, dotted with sparse vegetation. She consulted the mental map from their mission briefing. Southeast, toward the ridgeline barely visible on the horizon. The extraction point lay somewhere beyond. Her first steps into open terrain nearly ended their journey. Without buildings for support, the full weight of Mills threatened to collapse her small frame. Sarah stumbled, almost pitching forward. Only a desperate shift of balance saved them both from crashing to the ground. "Damn it!" she hissed, fighting for stability. "Adjust. Adapt." She widened her stance, finding a shambling gait that sacrificed speed for stability. One foot, then the other. Inches becoming feet. Feet becoming yards. The pain receded into a dull background constant, her mind floating strangely detached from her straining body. An hour passed. The village fell behind, though not far enough for comfort. Sarah calculated they'd covered perhaps half a mile, a sixth of their journey. At this rate, they'd reach extraction sometime tomorrow evening. If they weren't discovered first. If Mills survived that long. If she could physically continue. She found a shallow depression behind a rock formation as full darkness descended. Not ideal cover, but better than open ground. With excruciating care, she lowered Mills onto a relatively flat surface. "Status?" he asked, more lucid than he'd been since surgery. "We've cleared the village," Sarah reported, checking his wounds. The bandages held minimal fresh bleeding. She administered antibiotics from her dwindling supply. "Half-mile southeast. No pursuit that I can detect." Mills's eyes, shadowed in the dim light, studied her. "You actually carried me. Don't sound so surprised." She offered him water, supporting his head as he drank. "Not conventional, but effective." "How far to extraction?" "About 2.5 miles. His expression darkened. "You can't make that distance. Not carrying me." "Already working on it," Sarah replied, though in truth, she had no idea how she would continue. Her body trembled with exhaustion. Muscles threatened to seize. The harness had rubbed her shoulders raw despite the padding. Mills seemed to read her thoughts. "Bennett, Sarah, listen to me. I've seen men twice your size fail at half this challenge. Good thing I'm not them." She busied herself checking his fore, avoiding his gaze. "This is beyond human capability." Sarah finally met his eyes. "Maybe, but it's not beyond mine." She turned away, scanning their surroundings. The night offered temporary concealment, but dawn would make them vulnerable again. They needed to use the darkness while it lasted. "We rest 30 minutes, she decided. "Then continue." Mills watched her silently, something shifting in his expression, the first glimmer of what might have been respect. "What drives you, Bennett?" Sarah adjusted the harness, preparing for the next stage of their impossible journey. "Same thing as you, Sergeant. I don't leave people behind." Dawn broke with cruel clarity, revealing their exposed position. Sarah had pushed through the night, stopping only when absolute exhaustion demanded it. Her world had contracted to the mechanical repetition of movement. Step, adjust, breathe, step again. The small bottle of morphine in her pocket remained mostly untouched. She'd given Mills minimal doses, saving the precious medicine for when his pain became unbearable. "We need to find better cover," she murmured, more to herself than Mills. The terrain ahead offered little concealment, rocky outcroppings interspersed with open stretches. Mills stirred from his semi-conscious state. "How far?" "Maybe another half-mile since we last stopped. 2 miles to go." Sarah didn't add what they both knew. Their pace was slowing dramatically. She checked his wounds again. The makeshift bandages had held, but Mills's skin felt hot to the touch. Early signs of infection, despite the antibiotics. She administered another dose, conscious of their dwindling supply. "There's a ravine," Mills said, voice raspy. "Should be about a 1/4 mile east. Used it during training exercises." Sarah nodded, adjusting their course. Every movement sent spasms through her overtaxed muscles. The harness had worn bloody patches on her shoulders and hips, the pain a constant companion. She'd stopped feeling it as distinct sensation hours ago. They covered 100 yards before Sarah spotted movement on the horizon. She immediately dropped to the ground, bringing Mills down with as much care as speed allowed. A patrol, 3 vehicles moving along the ridge they'd been heading toward. "Enemy?" she whispered. Mills squinted. "Can't tell. Can't risk it either way." They remained motionless as the vehicles passed. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour before Sarah deemed it safe to continue. The delay cost them precious time and daylight. When she attempted to lift Mills again, her legs buckled. Sarah crashed to her knees, the impact sending shockwaves through her exhausted frame. "Bennett," Mills said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "You need to rest." "Can't." She forced herself up, wobbling. "Infections setting in. Need to reach extraction." "Not if you kill yourself getting there." Sarah ignored him, focusing instead on reconnecting with the determination that had carried them this far. She thought of her father, of the quiet pride in his eyes when she'd overcome challenges others thought impossible. With trembling hands, she readjusted the harness. Each movement cost more than the last. When she finally stood with Mills's weight across her back, black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "One step," she whispered to herself. "Just one step." That first step nearly broke her. The second wasn't easier. By the fifth, something had changed, her body finding some last reservoir of strength, moving on automatic function rather than conscious control. They reached the ravine Mills had mentioned just as the sun climbed toward midday. The shallow depression offered modest protection from sight and the increasingly brutal heat. Sarah lowered Mills with shaking arms, then collapsed beside him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Water," she managed, fumbling for their canteen. They had less than a day's supply remaining. Mills watched her with increasing concern. "Your limits aren't relevant," Sarah cut him off, taking a small sip before offering him the canteen. His massive hand engulfed hers as he accepted it. "Everyone has limits, Bennett. No shame in that." Sarah leaned back against the ravine wall, eyes closed. "True, but they're rarely where others put them." They rested in silence, the sun beating down mercilessly. Sarah felt herself drifting, exhaustion pulling her toward unconsciousness. She fought it, knowing they couldn't afford the delay. A sound snapped her back to full alertness, the crunch of boots on gravel nearby. Sarah froze, hand moving instinctively to the sidearm at her hip. Mills had heard it too, his body tensing despite his injuries. The footsteps grew closer. One person moving cautiously. Sarah raised the pistol, steadying her trembling arm with her opposite hand. A figure appeared at the edge of the ravine, a single enemy scout rifle held ready. He hadn't spotted them yet, his attention directed further down the depression. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger. As a medical professional, she'd never fired at another human outside of training scenarios. The Hippocratic oath warred with survival instinct. The scout turned, his gaze sweeping toward their position. Any moment he would see them. Mills's hand closed over Sarah's wrist, steadying her aim. No words passed between them, but his meaning was clear. Do what must be done. The scout's eyes widened as he spotted them. His rifle began to rise. Sarah's training took over. Exhale. Squeeze, don't pull. The report echoed through the ravine. The scout crumpled, weapon unfired. The silence that followed seemed deafening. Sarah lowered the pistol, her hand shaking violently now. "First time?" Mills asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. "Won't be the last," he said. "Not if we want to survive this." Sarah holstered the weapon, her medic's instincts battling with tactical necessity. "We need to move. Where there's one, there will be others." Sarah's compass, its glass cracked from their rough journey, still pointed faithfully southeast. She studied it before tucking it back into her pocket, calculating their progress. They'd veered east to avoid open terrain, adding distance but gaining better cover. The trade-off meant slower progress toward extraction. "How much farther?" Mills asked, his voice weaker than before. "Mile and a half, give or take." Sarah didn't mention that at their current pace, they wouldn't make it before nightfall. Mills's fever had worsened despite the antibiotics. His skin burned hot, eyes glassy with infection. Sarah had done everything possible with her limited supplies, but he needed proper medical attention soon. "You should have been a drill sergeant," Mills said unexpectedly, a hint of delirium in his voice. Sarah adjusted the harness, preparing to lift him again. "Why's that?" Never seen anyone push past limits like you. His massive hand gestured weakly at her small frame. They said you were too weak. They were wrong. Sarah positioned herself, bracing for the now familiar agony of standing with his weight. They were wrong, Mills agreed, surprising her. I was wrong. The admission hung between them as Sarah struggled upright. Her muscles, pushed beyond endurance, responded with violent protest. Each step forward seemed more impossible than the last, yet somehow her body continued moving. My father, she gasped between labored breaths, finding that talking helped maintain rhythm, always said people confuse size with strength. Smart man, engineer, taught me physics, leverage. When I was little, they fell silent as Sarah navigated a particularly rough patch of terrain. The movement jostled Mills's wounds, drawing a hiss of pain from the sergeant. Sorry, she murmured. Keep going, he managed through clenched teeth. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening across the rocky landscape. Sarah's vision had begun to tunnel, her world narrowing to the ground immediately before her feet. She no longer felt specific pain. Her entire body had become one massive, throbbing nerve. Mills drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering information that Sarah struggled to piece together. Something about intelligence, enemy movements, planned offensives. In his fever, he seemed to believe he was reporting to superiors. Delta Company, Northwest Quadrant. He mumbled. Coordinated attack. 3 days. Sarah listened while continuing their painful progress. Whatever information Mills carried, it clearly held strategic importance, perhaps explaining why he'd been specifically targeted in the ambush. The sun touched the horizon when Sarah detected movement ahead, a patrol of 4 enemy soldiers moving perpendicular to their path. She immediately dropped to the ground, the impact nearly causing her to black out. Mills groaned but remained otherwise silent. The patrol passed less than 100 yards away. Sarah held her breath, willing her trembling muscles to stillness. Minutes passed before she dared move again. Bennett, Mills whispered once the danger passed. You need to leave me. Not happening. She struggled back to her feet. Listen to me. His voice gained strength from urgency. I'm slowing you down. Information I have. Command needs it. More important than one soldier. Sarah adjusted the harness again, redistributing his weight across her raw shoulders. Then I'll get both you and your information to command. You're killing yourself, Mills said bluntly. I can see it. Your concern is noted, Sergeant. Sarah took another step forward, then another, her body moving through sheer will rather than physical capability. Goddamn stubborn woman, Mills muttered, but without heat. Learned from the best. She thought of her father, of Captain Reynolds, of Mills himself, all stubborn in their own ways. As twilight deepened into night, Sarah finally accepted they wouldn't reach extraction before morning. They needed to find secure shelter for the night. A shallow cave formed by fallen boulders offered minimal protection, better than nothing in the increasingly cold night air. With the last of her strength, Sarah lowered Mills into the relative safety of the formation. Her legs gave out as she tried to check his wounds, sending her sprawling beside him. Sorry, she gasped. Just need a minute. Mills reached out, his large hand finding her shoulder in the darkness. You've done enough, Bennett. More than anyone could ask. Not enough yet. She forced herself to examine his bandages by touch, finding them soaked through with fresh blood and serum. The infection was worsening. Why? Mills asked, his voice barely audible. Why push so hard for someone who never believed in you? Sarah considered the question as she administered their last dose of antibiotics. Not doing it for you, she finally answered. Not doing it to prove anything either. Then why? She settled beside him, her body trembling with exhaustion. Because it's the right thing. Because it's who I am. In the darkness, Mills was silent for so long Sarah thought he'd lost consciousness again. Then his hand found hers, engulfing it completely. They were wrong about you, he said simply. I was wrong about you. Morning light revealed the toll of their journey. Sarah's uniform hung in tatters, darkened with dirt, sweat, and blood. Most of it Mills's, some her own from where the harness had worn her skin raw. Her reflection in a small puddle startled her. Hollow-eyed, face streaked with grime, looking a decade older than her 28 years. Mills's condition had deteriorated overnight. His breathing came shallow and rapid, skin burning with fever. The wound in his abdomen showed angry red streaks spreading outward, blood poisoning setting in despite Sarah's best efforts. "We need to move," she said, more to herself than to Mills. One more push. Her body refused to cooperate. Muscles locked in protest, joints stiff from cold and overexertion. Sarah forced herself through stretching exercises her father had taught her, fighting to restore minimal function. "Bennett?" Mills murmured, more lucid than she expected. "Look at me." She knelt beside him. "You've done more than anyone could ask," he said. "But we both know the situation." Sarah checked their remaining supplies. Half a canteen of water, no antibiotics, minimal bandages. "We're a mile from extraction. Maybe less. And I'm dying." He stated it without drama, a simple tactical assessment. "Not on my watch." She began adjusting the harness for what she hoped would be their final push. "The intelligence," Mills started. "Comes with you," Sarah finished firmly. "Both or neither, Sergeant. That's the deal." A sound outside their shelter froze them both. A voice, then another, speaking the enemy's language. Sarah carefully reached for her sidearm, checking the ammunition. 4 rounds remaining. The voices grew closer. At least 2 hostiles, possibly more. Sarah positioned herself at the entrance to their rocky shelter, pistol ready. If they were discovered, she'd have seconds to act. A shadow fell across the entrance. Sarah held her breath, finger tensing on the trigger. The enemy soldier appeared suddenly, his expression showing as much surprise as Sarah felt. His rifle began to rise. Sarah fired twice, the reports deafening in the confined space. The soldier dropped. Shouts erupted outside. Sarah glimpsed a second fighter taking cover behind nearby rocks. She ducked back as bullets pinged off their shelter. "More coming," Mills warned, struggling to sit up. "Give me the pistol." Sarah ignored him, calculating angles and opportunities. The second fighter had them pinned down but wasn't advancing, waiting for reinforcements. Likely. She spotted something on the fallen enemy soldier. Dog tags glinting in the morning light. But it was the object beside him that caught her attention. A grenade's on his belt. "Cover," she told Mills, then launched herself from the shelter in a diving roll. Bullets kicked up dust around her as she reached the fallen soldier, yanked a grenade free and pulled the pin. With a practiced motion, she hurled it toward the position of the second fighter before scrambling back to their shelter. The explosion sent debris raining down. When the dust cleared, silence had returned to the landscape. Sarah cautiously checked outside. The second fighter lay motionless. She quickly retrieved his weapon and ammunition, along with the dog tags from both soldiers. "Where did you learn that?" Mills asked when she returned. "Combat training. I passed the same courses as everyone else." She tucked the dog tags into her pocket. Not as trophies, but as reminders of what this journey was costing. "Most medics I know would have hesitated." Sarah checked the rifle she'd acquired, fully loaded, in good condition. "Most medics aren't trapped behind enemy lines with critical intelligence." She helped Mills drink the last of their water, then prepared him for transport. The addition of the rifle complicated her already precarious balance, but having a proper weapon improved their chances significantly. When she finally stood with Mills secured across her back, the world swam before her eyes. Her body was reaching absolute limits, no reserves left, running on determination alone. "Bennett," Mills said quietly, "what you're doing, it's not possible." And yet, she took a shaky step forward. Here we are. They moved slowly, every yard a victory against impossible odds. Sarah used the rifle as a walking staff supporting some of their combined weight. The extraction point lay across increasingly steep terrain, the final approach requiring them to navigate a rocky incline. Sarah's focus narrowed to mechanical repetition. Step. Breathe. Adjust. Step again. Her mind detached from the screaming pain of her body, floating in a strange half-conscious state where only will remained. Tell me about your father, Mills requested suddenly, his voice pulling her back to reality. Sarah welcomed the distraction. Raised me alone after Mom died. Taught physics at the local high school. He taught you well. He showed me that strength isn't just about muscle. Another painful step forward. It's about understanding forces, using them instead of fighting them. Smart man, Mills commented. Raised a hell of a daughter. Sarah felt an unexpected sting of tears. Coming from Mills, who had doubted her most openly, the recognition meant something she hadn't realized she needed. Almost there, she managed, though in truth, she had no idea how she would climb the final ridge that separated them from potential safety. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly as Sarah navigated the increasingly difficult terrain. Each step became a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. Mills had fallen silent, consciousness fading as infection tightened its grip. Sarah stumbled, nearly sending them both crashing to the ground. She caught herself against a boulder, legs trembling violently. Just rest a minute, she gasped, though Mills couldn't hear her. As she leaned against the sun-warmed stone, a flutter of movement caught her eye. In a crevice, near her hand, a small piece of paper had been wedged deliberately. Sarah hesitated, then carefully extracted it. The note was handwritten in the local dialect, but beneath was a translation in broken English. Medical aid at Stonehouse. Friends. 500 M East. Sarah stared at the paper. A trap? Possibly. But if genuine, it could mean salvation for Mills, whose breathing had grown increasingly labored. The tactical choice was clear: continue toward the extraction point or divert to potential help. Sarah glanced at Mills. Without immediate medical intervention, he wouldn't survive to reach extraction. Decision made, she adjusted their course eastward. The terrain leveled somewhat, following what appeared to be a goat path winding between rock formations. After 30 agonizing minutes, she spotted it. A small stone structure nestled against the hillside, thin smoke rising from its chimney. Sarah approached cautiously, rifle ready despite her exhaustion. She lowered Mills behind a rocky outcropping before advancing. A woman appeared in the doorway of the structure, elderly and stooped. She carried no visible weapons, her weathered hands raised to show they were empty. American, the woman called in heavily accented English. Medicine. Come. Sarah hesitated, instincts warring. The woman disappeared inside, then returned with a first aid kit bearing Red Cross markings. Resistance, the woman explained, pointing to herself. Help Americans. Many years. Relief crashed through Sarah with such force she nearly collapsed. My friend, she managed. Wounded. Infection. The woman nodded, gesturing urgently. Bring. Quickly. With renewed purpose, Sarah returned to Mills and somehow found the strength to carry him the final distance to the stone house. Inside, she found a simple but clean space. A young man appeared from a back room, helping Sarah lower Mills onto a pallet. I am Nadia. The woman introduced herself. My grandson, Farid. We help resistance. Sarah didn't waste time on pleasantries. He has gunshot wounds. Infection. Needs antibiotics, wound cleaning. Nadia nodded, already examining Mills with practiced hands. American medicine, she said, opening a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside lay a surprisingly well-stocked medical cache. You're with the local resistance? Sarah asked as she helped prepare antibiotics. Farid nodded. Many years. This route many soldiers pass. We help. Working together. They cleaned Mills's wounds properly, administered proper antibiotics, and changed his bandages. Throughout the procedure, Mills remained unconscious, stirring only when the pain became too intense. Enemy patrols? Sarah asked as they worked. Many now, Farid confirmed. Looking for Americans. Very important American. He glanced meaningfully at Mills. Sarah understood. The enemy knew exactly who they were hunting and why. Mills's intelligence was significant enough to warrant this level of pursuit. Extraction point, Sarah said. How far from here? Fareed and Nadia exchanged glances. The older woman spoke rapidly in their language, Fareed translating. Grandmother says your extraction point is compromised. Enemy soldiers waiting there since yesterday. Sarah's heart sank. Are you certain? Fareed nodded grimly. Our people watch. Many enemy 20, 30 soldiers. Waiting. Their last hope vanished. Even if they reached the extraction point, they'd be walking into an ambush. New extraction, Fareed continued, unfolding a crude map. American radio. Different place. He pointed to a location marked with an X, approximately 5 miles west of their current position. 5 miles. Sarah stared at the map in disbelief. She could barely stand, let alone carry Mills another 5 miles. Nadia placed a gnarled hand on Sarah's arm, speaking softly. Fareed translated. Grandmother says you rest. Eat. We help as much as possible. For the first time since the ambush, Sarah felt tears threatening. She swallowed hard, nodding gratefully. While Mills rested, Nadia fed Sarah a simple stew that tasted better than anything she could remember. The respite allowed her to treat her own wounds. Shoulders and hips rubbed raw from the harness, blisters on her feet, muscles strained to tearing. How long can we stay? She asked Fareed. Few hours only, he replied. Patrol comes to village below at sunset. We'll search houses after. Sarah studied the map again. 5 miles west, across even more difficult terrain than they'd already traversed. In her current state, carrying Mills that distance seemed mathematically impossible. I'll find a way, she murmured to herself. Nadia watched her with knowing eyes. She spoke again, Fareed translating. Grandmother says sometimes the body stops, but the spirit continues. Sarah managed a tired smile. Your grandmother is very wise. She says you remind her of her daughter, small but strong inside, heart like mountain. Sarah glanced toward Mills, whose color had improved slightly with proper medication. She thought of the miles ahead, the enemies between them and safety, the physical impossibility of their journey. Tell your grandmother thank you, she said softly, for everything. Late afternoon brought a steady drizzle, turning the already challenging terrain treacherous. Sarah stood in the doorway of Nadia's home, watching water cascade down the rocky slopes they would soon have to navigate. The makeshift harness hung in her hands, partially repaired with strips torn from her uniform sleeve. Not possible in rain, Fareed said, joining her. Wait until stops. Sarah shook her head. Enemy patrols increasing. We need to move while we have daylight. Inside, Mills had regained consciousness, his fever reduced by proper antibiotics. When Sarah returned to check on him, his eyes tracked her movements with newfound clarity. Situation? He asked, voice stronger than it had been in days. Sarah gave him the unvarnished truth. Their original extraction point compromised. New location 5 miles west. Enemy patrols intensifying. As she spoke, she reapplied bandages and checked his wounds. The treatment had helped, but he remained far from mobile. You've done enough, Bennett, Mills said when she finished. These people can get word to our forces. And leave you. Sarah continued preparing for departure, avoiding his gaze. That's an order. With respect, Sergeant, you're still my patient. She tightened the final knot on the harness. And I'm not leaving you behind. Mills grabbed her wrist, his massive hand engulfing hers. Look at yourself, Bennett. You're at the breaking point. Sarah glanced down at her torn uniform, at the raw, bleeding patches on her shoulders visible through the ripped fabric. I've still got a little left. This isn't about proving something. No, she cut him off. It's about getting you and your intelligence back safely. It's about doing my job. Nadia entered with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She pressed it into Sarah's hands, speaking softly. Fareed translated, medicine for journey, food, map with safe places marked. Sarah thanked her, tucking the precious supplies into her remaining pockets. Fareed added a small radio, primitive but functional. American frequency, he explained, for extraction. Within the hour, they were ready to depart. The rain continued, but waiting posed its own dangers. Sarah positioned Mills on her back, the improved harness distributing his weight marginally better than before. Northwest route, Fareed advised, pointing to a narrow path that snaked up the hillside. Less patrol. More climb. Sarah nodded, already feeling her legs tremble beneath Mills's weight. The brief rest had restored some function, but her body remained desperately overtaxed. Fareed and Nadia watched from the doorway as Sarah took her first agonizing steps away from their shelter. The old woman raised her hand in blessing or farewell, her weathered face reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. The rain made each step treacherous. Twice in the first 100 yards, Sarah slipped, only barely maintaining balance. The third time, she couldn't recover. Her feet shot out from under her on slick stone, sending both her and Mills crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through Sarah's left side as she took the brunt of the fall, trying to protect Mills from impact. For several moments, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the white-hot agony coursing through her body. "Bennett!" Mills's voice seemed to come from far away. "Bennett, can you hear me?" Sarah forced her eyes open, rain pelting her face. "I'm okay," she gasped, though she was anything but just winded. Mills had been thrown clear of the harness. He dragged himself toward her, grimacing with the effort. "You're hurt. Bruised ribs. Maybe cracked." Sarah struggled to sit up, each breath a new lesson in pain. "Give me a minute." Mills studied her with grave concern. "This is it, Bennett. The limit." Sarah knew he was right. Her body had finally reached absolute failure. Physics and determination could only overcome physical limitations for so long. The human frame had breaking points, and she had found hers. "No," she whispered, more to herself than to Mills. "No, I can do this." "You already have," Mills said quietly. "More than anyone could have asked." But Sarah wasn't listening. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When direct force fails, change your approach. There's always another way." Her gaze fell on the steep, muddy slope beside them. Not a path, but a potential solution. "We can't walk out," she said slowly, mind racing. "But we could slide." Mills stared at her. "You're delirious." Sarah shook her head, wincing at the movement. "Controlled descent. The rain makes it possible." She pointed down the steep hillside. "That direction leads toward the extraction point. If we use the slope." "That's insane," Mills protested. "We could be killed. Less dangerous than staying here." Sarah forced herself to her feet, ignoring the symphony of pain from her abused body. "Help me make a travois." Using branches and the remnants of her harness, Sarah constructed a crude but functional sledge. Mills watched with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "You never quit, do you?" he asked as she secured him to the makeshift device. Sarah tested the bindings, ensuring Mills would stay in place during their descent. "Not when it matters." With the last of her strength, she positioned the travois at the edge of the slope, calculated the angle of descent, and made final adjustments. The rain continued to fall, turning the hillside into a muddy waterslide. Dangerous, but navigable with proper technique. "Ready?" she asked, taking position to guide their descent. Mills met her gaze, then nodded once. "Lead the way, Bennett." The descent was controlled chaos. Sarah guided the makeshift sledge with her body weight, using the rifle as a rudder and brake. Mud sprayed around them as they slid down the hillside, gaining speed despite her efforts to moderate their momentum. Mills clung to the travois, his massive frame tense with pain and anticipation. Neither spoke. All concentration focused on surviving the precipitous journey downward. Halfway down, disaster struck. A hidden rock caught the edge of the sledge, sending them into a violent spin. Sarah lost her grip on the rifle as they careened sideways, tumbling over rocks and scrub brush. The world became a blur of mud, rain, and pain until they finally crashed to a stop at the bottom of the incline. For several moments, Sarah couldn't move. Every part of her body screamed in protest. Slowly, she raised her head, blinking mud from her eyes. "Mills?" she called, voice barely audible. A groan answered her. The travois had broken apart during their fall, but Mills appeared largely intact, though covered in mud from head to toe. "Still alive," he confirmed grimly. Sarah forced herself upright, surveying their surroundings. The descent had carried them much farther than she'd anticipated, at least half a mile in the right direction. But it had deposited them in unfamiliar territory. What she saw ahead froze her blood. Less than 100 yards away stood a small outpost, enemy uniforms visible through the rain. "Don't move," she whispered to Mills, slowly lowering herself back to the ground. They'd landed in the worst possible location, directly in sight of an enemy forward operating base. The rain and mud had likely saved them from immediate detection, but any movement would expose their position. "Options?" Mills asked, his tactical mind still functioning despite his condition. Sarah assessed the situation with growing dread. They couldn't retreat up the hillside. Going around the outpost meant crossing open ground. They had no weapons, no cover, and no strength left. "We wait," she decided, "until dark, then try to circle around." Mills nodded slightly, then winced. Bandages tore loose in the fall. Sarah checked his wounds as subtly as possible, finding that the primary abdominal bandage had indeed come loose. Blood seeped slowly but steadily from the reopened wound. "Need to stop that bleeding," she murmured. But accessing their medical supplies meant moving, risking detection. Sarah weighed the options, immediate danger of discovery versus Mills slowly bleeding out. "Do it," Mills whispered, reading her thoughts. "Quick." Taking a deep breath, Sarah reached slowly for the medical pack still miraculously attached to her belt. As she extracted a pressure bandage, movement from the outpost caught her eye. A soldier had emerged, scanning the hillside. Sarah froze, hand halfway to Mills's wound. The soldier raised binoculars, sweeping the area methodically. "Don't move," Mills breathed. The soldier lowered the binoculars, apparently satisfied. He turned back toward the outpost, then hesitated. Something had caught his attention. Sarah realized with horror that the rifle, lost during their fall, lay exposed on a rock nearby, sunlight glinting off its metal despite the rain. The soldier raised his binoculars again, focusing directly on the weapon. Then his gaze shifted, moving in a pattern that would inevitably lead to their position. "He's going to spot us," Sarah whispered. "If he raises the alarm, we're finished," Mills responded. Decision time. Sarah weighed impossible options: remain hidden and certainly be discovered, or take action with minimal chance of success. "Stay here," she ordered Mills. Before he could protest, she began crawling away from him, using the muddy ground for concealment. Her goal: reach the rifle before the enemy soldier spotted them both. It was a desperate gamble with terrible odds. The soldier continued his methodical scan, moving closer to discovering their position with each passing second. Sarah inched forward through the mud, progress agonizingly slow. 20 yards to the rifle. 15. 10. The soldier suddenly stiffened, binoculars fixed on a point near Mills. He'd spotted something. Sarah abandoned stealth for speed, lunging the final distance to the rifle. As her hand closed around it, the soldier shouted an alert, raising his own weapon. Sarah rolled to her back, bringing the rifle up in one fluid motion. The shot rang out across the hillside. The soldier crumpled, but the damage was done. Shouts erupted from the outpost as others responded to the alarm. Sarah scrambled back to Mills. "We have to move. Now." "Where?" he demanded as she frantically tried to secure his bleeding wound. "The outpost," she said, surprising them both. "It's our only option." Mills stared at her. "You want to go toward the enemy? They'll expect us to flee." Sarah finished applying the pressure bandage. "Plus, they'll have medical supplies, communication equipment, maybe transportation." It was insanity, 2 injured Americans infiltrating an enemy outpost. But the alternatives were worse. "Help me up?" Mills grunted, determination replacing doubt. With agonizing effort, Sarah helped Mills to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, but managed to remain upright, the first time he'd stood since the ambush. "Can't carry you anymore," Sarah admitted, her body finally reaching absolute limits. Mills nodded grimly. "Then we go together." Slowly, as enemy soldiers poured from the outpost, searching the hillside, Sarah and Mills made their painful way not away from danger, but directly toward it, gambling everything on the enemy's expectation that they would flee rather than advance. In Mills's pocket, Sarah found something unexpected, an enemy medical kit, taken from one of the soldiers they'd encountered earlier. Its presence seemed like both a warning and a promise of what lay ahead. The enemy outpost consisted of 3 small structures nestled against a rocky outcropping. As Sarah had gambled, the soldiers fanned out in the opposite direction, searching the hillside where they expected fleeing Americans to be hiding. "Service and trance," Mills whispered, indicating a rear door partially obscured by supply crates. They moved with excruciating slowness, Mills leaning heavily on Sarah's shoulder. Each step threatened to collapse them both, but somehow they remained upright, driven by desperation and the knowledge that discovery meant certain death. Reaching the door required crossing 20 yards of open ground. Sarah counted 6 soldiers visible in the distance, all facing away. "Now or never. Ready?" she asked Mills. He nodded grimly, jaw clenched against pain. They crossed the open space in an awkward, shambling gait that barely qualified as movement. Sarah's vision tunneled, narrowing to just the door ahead. Her entire existence contracted to this single task. Reach the door, reach the door, reach the door. By some miracle, they made it. Sarah tried the handle. "Locked." "Move," Mills whispered, producing a combat knife she hadn't realized he carried. With practiced motion, he worked the blade between door and frame, manipulating the simple lock mechanism. The door opened with a soft click. Inside lay a supply room, medical equipment, rations, and communications gear stacked on metal shelving. Sarah helped Mills to the floor behind a large storage cabinet, then secured the door. "Check for personnel," Mills directed. His breathing labored from the exertion. Sarah moved cautiously through the room, confirming it was empty. On a desk near the back wall sat an enemy communication device, more sophisticated than she'd expected to find in a forward outpost. "We need to contact extraction," she said, examining the unfamiliar equipment. Mills struggled to focus. "Can't use their radio directly. They'll monitor frequencies." "Then what?" A sound from outside interrupted her, voices approaching the door. Sarah ducked behind the cabinet with Mills' heart pounding. 2 enemy soldiers entered, speaking rapidly in their language. They moved to the communications device, making adjustments and checking readings. One spoke into the handset while the other took notes. Sarah watched through a narrow gap between cabinet and wall. The soldiers appeared to be receiving instructions, nodding in response to whatever came through the radio. The conversation continued for several minutes before they departed, leaving the door slightly ajar. When their footsteps faded, Sarah moved cautiously back to the device. "Did you understand any of that?" Mills nodded, face grim. "Enough. They've identified us. Not just random Americans. They know exactly who I am and what intelligence I carry." Sarah absorbed this. "How?" "Unless we have a leak," Mills confirmed. "Someone told them about the mission before we even departed. That's why the ambush was so perfectly executed." Sarah's mind raced through implications. The change in extraction point could be compromised too. Mills shifted, grimacing as pain shot through his wounds. "We can't trust any of our planned exfil routes. This changed everything. If enemy forces knew their extraction plans, nowhere was safe. They were trapped behind enemy lines with no reliable way out." "The device," Sarah said suddenly, noticing something on the communications equipment. "It's intercepting our frequencies." Mills followed her gaze. "Tactical scanner. They're monitoring all our communications." Sarah examined the device more closely. Complex but not incomprehensible. If they could use it to listen to enemy communications instead. I can reconfigure this, she said. My father taught me basic electronics, and I had communications training. Do it, Mills urged. But hurry, they'll be back. Sarah worked quickly, adjusting settings and rerouting connections. Her hands, steady during surgery, now trembled with exhaustion, making the delicate work even more challenging. There, she said finally. Now we listen. The device crackled to life, enemy communications streaming through. Mills translated fragments. All units. American extraction helicopter coordinates. Sarah felt a chill. They know where our people are coming. It's an ambush. Mills nodded grimly. We need to warn them. How? If we transmit, the enemy will know our location instantly. Mills considered their options. Burst transmission. Quick, encoded message with enough information to abort the extraction. They won't have time to triangulate our position. Sarah examined the equipment again. I can set that up. What's the message? Operation compromised. Extraction site known to enemy. Intelligence leak confirmed. Abort, abort, abort. As Sarah prepared the transmission, Mills struggled to a more upright position. Bennett, once we send this, we need to move immediately. This location will be swarmed within minutes. Where do we go? All extraction points are compromised. Mills reached into his pocket, extracting a small data device she hadn't noticed before. Special Operations maintains emergency extraction protocols. Different channels, different locations. Sarah stared at him. You had this all along? Last resort only. Using it confirms we have a high-level intelligence breach. His eyes met hers. Once activated, we have 8 hours to reach the emergency extraction point. Where is it? Mills pointed to the map on the wall, a location 5 miles in the opposite direction from where they'd been heading. Sarah felt hope and despair in equal measure. 5 more miles in their condition seemed impossible. Yet this was their only chance. Ready for transmission, she said. Mills nodded. Send it. Then grab every medical supply you can carry. We're going to need it. Sarah pressed the transmit button, sending their warning into the ether. As the confirmation light flashed, she immediately began gathering supplies. Antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, anything useful. Outside, an alarm suddenly blared. Their transmission had been detected even faster than anticipated. Time to go, Mills said, struggling to his feet. Sarah supported him, heading for the rear exit. As they stepped outside, a new sound reached them, helicopter rotors in the distance. That's not extraction, Mills said grimly. Enemy reinforcements. Their situation had gone from desperate to nearly hopeless. But Sarah had long since passed the point where impossibility deterred her. Then we better move fast, she said, helping Mills away from the outpost as shouts erupted behind them. They fled into dense underbrush as enemy forces swarmed the outpost. Sarah supported Mills's considerable weight, her own body operating on nothing but determination. The impromptu medical treatment and antibiotics had improved his condition, but he remained gravely injured. Need to find cover, Mills gasped as they stumbled through the vegetation. Helicopter will have thermal imaging. Sarah spotted a shallow streambed cutting through the landscape ahead. Water, she said, might mask our heat signatures. They changed direction, making painfully slow progress toward the water. The helicopter's distinctive thrum grew louder, sweeping the area in methodical patterns. Down, Mills ordered suddenly. They dropped as the helicopter passed directly overhead. Sarah pressed her face into the muddy ground, willing her body to become invisible. The aircraft continued past them, but she knew it would circle back. When it was momentarily out of sight, they resumed their desperate crawl toward the stream. Reaching it, they slid down the eroded bank into ankle-deep water. Follow the streambed, Mills directed. Provides cover and masks our trail. They waded through the cold water, each step a negotiation between pain and necessity. Sarah had fashioned a crude signaling mirror from a piece of broken equipment taken from the outpost. If they could reach the emergency extraction point, they might be able to signal their presence to friendly forces. How much time? Sarah asked as they paused to rest in the shadow of an overhanging bank. Mills checked the small device from his pocket. 7 hours, 18 minutes until emergency extraction window opens. And how far? 5 miles as the crow flies. Likely 7 or 8 given the terrain we'll have to navigate. Sarah did the mental calculation. A mile per hour in their condition would be miraculous. They had no margin for error. Tell me about the intelligence, she said as they resumed movement, hoping conversation might keep Mills alert and distract them both from their physical suffering. Mills hesitated, then seemed to decide she'd earned the right to know. Joint operation details, troop movements, supply lines, embedded operatives. If the enemy gets this information, we lose tactical advantage across the entire region and put dozens of our people at risk. That's why they want you alive, Sarah realized. For interrogation. Mills nodded grimly. And why I can't be captured. The implication hung between them. If capture seemed inevitable, Mills would take his own life rather than risk the intelligence falling into enemy hands. Not going to happen, Sarah said firmly. We're getting out of here. They continued downstream until it became too shallow to provide adequate cover. According to the map Mills carried in his head, they needed to head northeast, across a sparsely wooded valley toward a series of rocky ridges. Open ground ahead, Sarah observed as they prepared to leave the streambed. No cover for at least half a mile. Mills studied the terrain. Need to time it between patrol patterns. Helicopter has been making 15-minute circuits. They watched the aircraft's movement, identifying its patrol pattern. When it banked away for another sweep, they made their move, emerging from the stream and moving as quickly as possible toward the distant tree line. Sarah's legs threatened to give out with each step. Mills moved beside her through sheer willpower, his massive frame supported by an arm across her shoulders. They made an absurd pair. The small, battered medic and the hulking, wounded sergeant, moving together in a three-legged race against death. Halfway across the open ground, the helicopter changed its pattern, banking back toward their position earlier than expected. Down! Mills pulled Sarah to the ground behind the only available cover, a small depression formed by rainwater runoff. The helicopter hovered nearby, spotlight sweeping the terrain. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shallow depression, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The spotlight passed within yards of their position, then continued its search pattern. Too close, she whispered when the aircraft finally moved away. They resumed their journey with even greater caution, finally reaching the relative safety of scattered trees. Each step took them closer to potential rescue, but Sarah's strength was fading rapidly. The brutal journey had depleted her reserves beyond recovery. Need to rest, Mills observed, noting her deteriorating condition. No time. Sarah forced herself forward. We stop, we die. Mills caught her arm. You collapse, we both die. 5 minutes. That's an order. She relented, sinking to the ground beneath a large tree. Mills checked their surroundings, then his timepiece. 6 hours, 40 minutes remaining, he reported. Sarah closed her eyes momentarily, feeling the weight of impossibility pressing down. When she opened them, Mills was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. What? She asked. Nothing. He looked away. Just thinking I was wrong about you. We all were. Sarah managed a tired smile. Took a near-death experience to change your mind? Sometimes that's what it takes. Mills shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. When we get back, if we get back, things need to change. The assumptions, the limitations put on soldiers like you. If we get back, Sarah echoed. I'll just be happy to be alive. Mills shook his head. It's more than that. What you've done. He struggled to find words. It matters, Bennett. Changes things. Before Sarah could respond, a sound froze them both. Voices in the distance, moving in their direction. A ground patrol closing in. "Time to move," she said, pushing herself up despite her body's protests. Mills nodded, checking the captured rifle. 2 rounds remained. Not enough for a firefight, but perhaps enough to buy time if necessary. As they prepared to continue their desperate journey, Sarah caught a glimpse of something in the early morning light, a glint of metal from their destination ridgeline. Using the improvised signaling mirror, she flashed a brief reflection toward it. A moment later, an answering flash winked from the distant rocks. "Someone's there," she whispered, hope flickering to life. "Friendly or enemy? Only one way to find out," Mills replied grimly. The last vial of antibiotics felt unnaturally light in Sarah's hands as she administered the final dose to Mills. Their stolen medical supplies were nearly depleted, timing that coincided ominously with their own physical deterioration. "That's it," she said, tucking the empty container away. "Nothing left." Mills nodded, his face drawn with pain but eyes remarkably clear. The treatment had kept infection at bay, giving him periods of lucidity between bouts of fever. "How much farther?" Sarah asked, helping him to his feet. 2 miles, maybe less." Mills winced as he shifted weight onto his injured leg. "Extraction window opens in 3 hours, 20 minutes. They had made progress, painfully slow but steady, navigating away from enemy patrols through increasingly rugged terrain. The mysterious signal from the ridge hadn't repeated, leaving them uncertain what awaited at their destination. Sarah supported Mills as they resumed their journey, each step requiring conscious effort. Her body had moved beyond normal exhaustion into a strange detached state where pain registered as distant information rather than immediate sensation. "Tell me something," Mills said suddenly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "What?" Sarah adjusted her grip on his waist, redistributing his weight. "Why medicine? Why not something safer?" Sarah considered the question. "My mother died when I was 12. Rare blood disorder. Nothing anyone could do. I'm sorry. I decided then I wanted to help people who could be saved." She navigated them around a rocky outcropping. "My father supported it, but worried constantly. Understandable. He never tried to stop me, though, even when I joined up." Sarah smiled faintly at the memory. "He said if I was determined to run toward danger, I might as well be properly trained." Mills chuckled, then grimaced as the movement jarred his wounds. "Wise man. What about you? Why military? Family tradition. For generations. Never questioned it." Mills paused. "Until recently. What changed?" He glanced at her. "Perspectives. Assumptions. Seeing someone half my size carry me across miles of hostile territory tends to adjust one's thinking." Before Sarah could respond, she stumbled, her exhausted legs finally betraying her. They both went down, Sarah barely managing to control their fall to minimize impact. For several moments, neither moved. Sarah stared up at the sky, her body refusing further commands. Beside her, Mills struggled to sit up. "Bennett," he said, concern evident. "You okay? Just need a minute." Her vision swam, darkness encroaching at the edges. "We don't have a minute." Mills checked their surroundings. "Patrol's been tracking us since the stream. They're getting closer." Sarah forced herself upright, fighting waves of dizziness. "I can keep going." Mills studied her with grave concern. "You're at the end. We both are. Doesn't matter." She stood, swaying slightly. "We're finishing this." As they resumed their painful progress, a new sound reached them. The distinctive whump-whump of helicopter rotors, different from the enemy aircraft. "American. Extraction's early," Mills said, hope and alarm mingling in his voice. "They're not following protocol. Maybe they had no choice." Sarah scanned the sky, seeing nothing through the canopy of trees. "Or it's a trap." Mills's expression darkened. "If the enemy compromised our emergency protocols." The helicopter sound grew louder, then faded as the aircraft passed overhead without slowing. "Reconnaissance," Mills concluded. "They're checking the LZ before committing to extraction. Then we need to be there." Sarah urged them forward with renewed determination. The terrain grew steeper as they approached the ridge. What would have been a challenging climb for healthy soldiers became nearly insurmountable in their condition. Each yard required multiple rest stops, their progress measured in minutes per foot rather than feet per minute. Time! Sarah gasped as they paused on a rocky shelf. 2 hours, 15 minutes until window opens. Mills leaned heavily against a boulder. Half-mile to the LZ, if my coordinates are correct. Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. She studied their remaining route, a near-vertical climb followed by what appeared to be more manageable terrain along the ridge top. Need to conserve strength for the final approach, Mills said, reading her thoughts. LZ will be exposed, vulnerable to ambush. We'll manage. Sarah offered him water from their nearly empty canteen. Mills drank sparingly, then handed it back. Bennett, Sarah, if we get separated, we won't. If we do, he insisted, the intelligence takes priority. Not me. Sarah met his gaze. Understood. There's a data chip, Mills continued, reaching into a hidden pocket in his uniform. Secondary location. Everything's on it. He pressed a small object into her palm. If I don't make it, you need to. Sarah closed her fingers around the chip, understanding the responsibility being entrusted to her. We're both making it. Mills nodded, though his expression suggested he had accepted other possibilities. They resumed climbing, each handhold a negotiation between determination and physical limitation. Halfway up the near-vertical section, Sarah's grip faltered. She slipped, scrabbling desperately at the rocky surface. Mills's hand shot out, catching her wrist in an iron grip. The sudden movement tore at his wounds, pain flashing across his face, but he held firm. I've got you, he grunted, straining to keep them both from falling. For a suspended moment, their roles reversed, the wounded giant supporting the exhausted medic. Then Sarah found footing, regaining her balance. Thanks, she managed, heart pounding. Returning the favor, Mills replied simply. They reached the top of the ridge as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The extraction landing zone lay ahead, a relatively flat area with sparse vegetation and good visibility in all directions. Too good, Sarah realized. Anyone approaching would be exposed for hundreds of yards. Perfect spot for an ambush, Mills voiced her thought. Sarah surveyed the area with growing concern. I don't see any cover for the final approach. There isn't any. Mills checked the time again. 1 hour, 40 minutes. They concealed themselves in the last available cover at the ridge's edge, watching for any sign of enemy activity. The helicopter had not returned, its brief appearance earlier providing no confirmation of friendly intentions. If it's a trap, Sarah said quietly, we're walking right into it. Mills nodded grimly. But if it's legitimate extraction and we miss it, the unspoken conclusion hung between them. There would be no second chances, no alternative options. This was their only way home. The red signal flare felt heavy in Sarah's pocket, their last means of communication with potential rescuers. As the extraction window approached, they observed the landing zone with growing apprehension. No movement, no signs of either friendly forces or enemy ambush. Something's wrong, Mills murmured. Too quiet. Sarah nodded. After days of relentless pursuit, the sudden absence of enemy activity seemed ominous rather than fortunate. Options? She asked. Mills studied the terrain with tactical precision despite his condition. Limited. We could circle around, approach from the far side. But that adds time we don't have. Or, direct approach, fast as possible. Use the flare at the last moment to signal extraction. Both choices carried deadly risks. Circling meant potentially missing their window. Direct approach meant exposing themselves completely. Your call, Sergeant, Sarah said. Mills eyes met hers. We go together. Direct approach. Timing is everything. Wait for my signal to use the flare. They used the remaining hour to prepare. Sarah rebandaged Mills's wounds one final time, using the last of their supplies. Mills checked and rechecked the rifle, 2 rounds remaining, each potentially the difference between life and death. Extraction window opens in 15 minutes, Mills announced. Helicopter will approach from the south. Hold position for no more than 2 minutes. Sarah helped him to his feet. For a moment, he rested his massive hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, he said quietly. What you've done. It matters, Bennett. Sarah nodded, unable to form words around the emotion tightening her throat. They began their approach, moving from the last available cover into open terrain. Every step felt like an invitation to disaster, but no shots came. No alarms sounded. The eerie silence persisted. Halfway to the landing zone, Mills suddenly stiffened. Movement. 3 o'clock. Behind those rocks. Sarah followed his gaze but saw nothing. Enemy? Can't tell. Keep moving. Be ready. They maintained their pace, Mills leaning heavily on Sarah. The distance to the landing zone shrank with excruciating slowness. 200 yards, 150, 100. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors suddenly echoed across the ridge. Sarah looked up, spotting the aircraft approaching from the south, right on schedule. Almost there, she encouraged Mills, whose breathing had become increasingly labored. That's when the trap was sprung. Enemy soldiers rose from concealed positions all around the landing zone, at least a dozen, weapons raised. They had been waiting, perfectly hidden, for exactly this moment. Down! Mills shoved Sarah to the ground as gunfire erupted. The helicopter, spotting the ambush, immediately banked away, taking defensive measures against shoulder-launched missiles fired from the ridge. No! Sarah cried, watching their rescue disappear. Mills pulled her behind a small rock outcropping, their only available cover. Bullets pinged off stone around them. They knew, Mills said grimly. The exact time, the exact location. Sarah's mind raced through limited options. The helicopter had aborted extraction but remained visible in the distance, circling just out of weapon range. They're waiting for us to signal, she realized. If we can clear the LZ. Mills checked the rifle. 2 rounds. Dozen enemies. Bad math. We need a diversion. Sarah's gaze fell on the signal flare. Something to draw them away from the LZ. The enemy fire intensified, chipping away at their minimal cover. Their position would be overrun within minutes. I'll draw them off, Mills said suddenly. You make for the secondary position, 300 yards west. Use the flare there. No, we stay together. Not an option anymore, Bennett. His expression was resolute. This is about more than us. The intelligence has to get through. Sarah knew he was right, but everything in her rebelled against the plan. You can't move fast enough on your own. Don't need to, just need to be loud. Mills checked the rifle one last time. On my signal, you run west. Don't stop, don't look back. Mills. That's an order. His voice softened. One I know you can follow. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in their ordeal. I didn't carry you this far to leave you behind. You carried me far enough. Mills reached out, his massive hand engulfing her shoulder. Now I do my part. Before she could protest further, he moved with surprising speed for a wounded man. Raising the rifle, he fired 1 round into the air. Here, he bellowed, his voice carrying across the ridge. Come and get me. He broke cover, moving east, away from Sarah and the secondary landing zone. The enemy's attention immediately shifted, gunfire following his path. Go! Mills shouted at Sarah. Now! Every instinct fought against leaving him, but the mission demanded. Eat! The intelligence. The lives depending on it. With a final agonized look at Mills's retreating form, Sarah sprinted west. Enemy shouts followed her, but most of their fire remained concentrated on Mills, exactly as he'd planned. She heard his final rifle shot, followed by more intense gunfire. Sarah ran as she had never run before, her battered body responding to this final desperate demand. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't slow, didn't look back. The secondary position came into view, a small clearing just large enough for helicopter touchdown. Sarah reached it as the sound of gunfire behind her reached a crescendo, then abruptly diminished. Mills had bought her time with his life. The helicopter remained visible in the distance, circling cautiously. Sarah withdrew the flare, hands shaking as she prepared to signal. The enemy would see it too, would redirect their attention any moment. One chance. One final moment to make Mills's sacrifice count. Sarah raised the flare gun skyward and pulled the trigger. A brilliant red star burst into the darkening sky, their last hope for salvation or the beacon that would bring enemies rushing to her position. The helicopter banked sharply, turning toward the flare. The helicopter banked toward Sarah's position, descending rapidly. Its approach brought both hope and terror. The noise would guide enemy forces directly to her location. Already she could hear shouts as they reoriented to the flare's position. The aircraft touched down in a swirl of dust and deafening rotor wash. The side door slid open, revealing a combat team in full tactical gear. A soldier wearing a medic's helmet jumped out, rushing towards Sarah while others established a defensive perimeter. "Bennett?" he shouted over the engine noise. "Lieutenant Rodriguez sent us." Relief nearly collapsed Sarah's remaining strength. "Mills," she gasped. "Back there. He's still alive." The medic, Wilson according to his nameplate, glanced in the direction she indicated, then spoke urgently into his radio. Two more soldiers immediately moved out, heading toward Mills's last position. "We need to get you aboard," Wilson insisted, supporting Sarah toward the helicopter. "Not without Mills," she resisted. "Team will get him. Priority is securing you and the intelligence." Enemy fire suddenly erupted from the ridge above. They had located the landing zone. Bullets pinged off the helicopter's armored skin as the door gunner returned fire. "Incoming!" someone shouted as an RPG streaked toward them. The pilot took evasive action, the helicopter lurching sideways. The RPG exploded nearby, showering them with debris. Sarah found herself being bodily lifted into the aircraft by Wilson and another soldier. "We're taking too much fire," the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. 30 seconds max. Sarah struggled against the soldiers restraining her. "Mills, we can't leave him." Wilson secured her with a harness. "Rescue team will find him. We can't stay." Another explosion rocked the helicopter. Through the open door, Sarah saw enemy forces advancing from multiple directions. "Taking damage," the pilot reported. "Hydraulic pressure dropping." The extraction team returned fire, creating a wall of suppression as they awaited their missing members. Sarah strained to see past the chaos, searching desperately for any sign of Mills or the soldiers who had gone after him. 10 seconds, the pilot warned. "Then we're dust." Just as the door gunner prepared to close the hatch, movement caught Sarah's attention. 3 figures emerged from the smoke and dust, 2 soldiers supporting a third, much larger form between them. "They've got him," Sarah cried. The team laid down covering fire as the 3 figures sprinted toward the helicopter. As they drew closer, Sarah could see it was indeed Mills, somehow still alive though barely conscious. The rescue team hauled Mills into the aircraft just as the pilot began liftoff. Enemy fire intensified, bullets striking all around them. The door gunner sustained a hit to his shoulder, tumbling backward. Sarah immediately moved to assist, medical training overriding everything else. She applied pressure to the wound while Wilson secured the door. "Go, go, go," Wilson shouted to the pilot. The helicopter lurched skyward, taking more hits as it gained altitude. Through the small window, Sarah watched the landing zone recede, enemy forces swarming the area they had just escaped. With the immediate danger passing, Sarah turned her attention to Mills. His condition was critical, multiple new gunshot wounds in addition to his original injuries. The rescue team's medic was already working on him, cutting away clothing to access wounds. "How bad?" she asked, moving to help despite her own exhaustion. "Bad," the medic replied grimly, "but he's hanging on." Sarah took Mills's massive hand in hers. His eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning through the haze of pain. "Bennett," he whispered. "You made it. We made it." she corrected. Both of us. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Knew you would. Sarah worked alongside the team medic, stabilizing Mills as best they could with the available equipment. Her body operated on automatic function, medical training superseding her own physical collapse. ETA to field hospital 12 minutes, the pilot announced. He needs blood, Sarah told the medic. Type O negative. We've got plasma, no whole blood on board. Sarah rolled up her sleeve. I'm O negative. Universal donor. The medic hesitated only briefly before nodding. Within moments, they had established a direct transfusion line. Sarah's blood flowing into Mills's massive frame. It was dangerous in her weakened state, but she didn't hesitate. Bennett, Mills murmured, watching the procedure through half-lidded eyes. You've given enough. Not quite yet, she replied, squeezing his hand. As the helicopter sped toward safety, Sarah felt the culmination of their impossible journey. She had carried Mills for miles across enemy territory, and now her blood flowed into his veins. One final act of carrying him home. The landscape below transformed from hostile territory to friendly lines. Sarah glimpsed a forward operating base ahead, medical personnel already assembling on the landing pad. Salvation was minutes away. Wilson appeared beside her, placing a combat medic's helmet beside her. Not her own, but one bearing the insignia of their rescue team. Lieutenant Rodriguez said to give you this, he explained. Said you've more than earned it. Sarah stared at the helmet, its significance not immediately registering through her exhaustion. Special Operations Combat Medical Badge, Wilson clarified. First woman to receive it in the field. The meaning slowly penetrated Sarah's fog. The badge represented official recognition of what she had accomplished, acknowledgement that she belonged in the most elite medical units, regardless of size or gender. Mills's eyes found hers, clarity returning despite his condition. Told you, he said softly. Changes everything. The helicopter began its descent toward the medical facility. Sarah felt consciousness slipping away as her body finally reached absolute limits. The last of her strength had gone to Mills, but it was enough. They had completed their journey. As darkness claimed her, Sarah heard the rescue team medic's voice. I don't believe it. She carried him out. Actually carried him. And Wilson's reply, yeah, and they called her too weak. Sarah awoke to the steady beep of medical monitors and the antiseptic smell of a proper hospital. Sunlight streamed through nearby windows, illuminating a room filled with flowers and cards. For several moments, she simply breathed, marveling at the absence of immediate danger. Welcome back, a familiar voice said. She turned to find Lieutenant Rodriguez seated beside her bed, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. Mills? She asked immediately, voice rough from disuse. Alive. Recovering. Thanks to you. Rodriguez leaned forward. You've been out for almost a week, Bennett. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, muscle damage. Doctor says it's a miracle you didn't suffer permanent injury. Sarah attempted to sit up, wincing as her body protested. The intelligence? Secured. Already making a difference. Rodriguez helped adjust her pillows. You saved a lot of lives, Bennett. Not just Mills. Memories flooded back. The ambush, the journey, Mills's sacrifice to ensure her escape. What happened with the leak? The compromised protocols. Rodriguez's expression darkened. We found the source. High level. It's being handled. He paused. Mills's information helped us identify the mole. Sarah nodded, processing this information. How long until I can see him? He's asking the same about you. Rodriguez smiled. Doctor says tomorrow if you're up to it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Captain Reynolds entered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Bennett, he greeted her, standing at the foot of her bed. Good to see you awake. Sarah nodded, unsure what to expect from the man who had doubted her capabilities from the beginning. Reynolds cleared his throat. I owe you an apology. A significant one. He met her gaze directly. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on irrelevant factors. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between them. Sarah found herself without ready response. Your actions, Reynolds continued, have prompted a review of physical qualification standards for combat medical personnel. Your performance demonstrated that traditional metrics may not accurately predict field effectiveness. Rodriguez smiled slightly. What the captain means is that you've changed things, Bennett. For yourself and others who'll come after you. Reynolds nodded in agreement. There's also this. He placed a small velvet box on her bedside table. Distinguished Service Cross. The ceremony is scheduled once you're on your feet. Sarah stared at the box, overwhelmed. The Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for extraordinary heroism. Thank you, sir, she managed. After Reynolds departed, Rodriguez squeezed her hand. Get some rest. You've earned it. The following day, a nurse wheeled Sarah into a private room in the recovery wing. Sergeant Mills occupied the bed, his massive frame making the hospital furniture seem undersized. Despite multiple surgeries and transfusions, color had returned to his face. The nurse left them alone, closing the door quietly behind her. For a moment, neither spoke. The shared ordeal hung between them, a bond formed through suffering and survival that needed no articulation. You look better, Sarah finally said. Mills chuckled, then winced slightly. Better than covered in mud and blood, you mean? That's a low bar. His expression sobered. They told me what you did. The blood transfusion on the helicopter. Sarah shrugged. Just medicine. Bennett, Mills said, his voice unusually gentle. Sarah, you carried me miles across enemy territory. No one thought that was possible. Including you, she reminded him. Especially me. He held her gaze. I was wrong. We all were. A comfortable silence fell between them. Through the window, Sarah could see the base hospital's garden. Personnel moving about their duties in the sunlight. What happens now? She asked. For me? 6 more surgeries, months of rehab. Mills shifted, adjusting his position. For you? Whatever you want, I imagine. Your actions have opened doors. Sarah considered this. The journey had changed her too. Confirmed something she had always believed but sometimes doubted in the face of persistent skepticism. My father's flying in tomorrow, she said. First time he's ever left the country. Mills smiled. He raised one hell of a daughter. He taught me what mattered. That strength isn't always visible. Sarah met Mills's gaze. That the human spirit has no limits. A knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal a young female recruit, nervously clutching a medical clipboard. Excuse me, ma'am, she addressed Sarah. I'm Specialist Chun. They've assigned me to your case. She hesitated. And they said I should ask you about field protocols. If you're willing. Sarah recognized the look in the young woman's eyes, determination coupled with the weight of others' doubt. She'd carried that same expression once. Pull up a chair, Specialist, Sarah invited. We've got some things to discuss. As Chun settled in, eagerly opening her notebook, Sarah caught Mills watching the interaction with quiet approval. Something had shifted, not just in their individual perspectives, but in the system itself. A door had been opened that couldn't easily be closed again. Outside the window, a medical evacuation helicopter descended to the landing pad, its crew rushing to meet it. Among them, Sarah spotted female medics moving with confidence and authority, their skill unquestioned. One journey had ended. Another was just beginning. So, Sarah turned to the young specialist. Let's start with what they don't teach you in training.